On our concluding episode, we're delighted to welcome Denise Wong, Assistant Chief Executive at IMDA. Together, we'll uncover the pivotal factors driving Singapore's approach to new technology and how it is positioning itself as a global leader in responsible AI governance.
Hi everyone, welcome to our next edition of Maxwell En-Route. Today, we're very pleased to have with us Ms. Denise Wong, who is the Assistant Chief Executive from IMDA, specifically in the area of data, innovation and protection. She's also the Deputy Commissioner of the Personal Data Protection Commission, and she's here to bring us a bit more of the government's perspective on AI governance and development in Singapore. So welcome, Denise.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for giving the time. Could you tell us a bit more specifically about what IMDA does in the area of sort of tech development in Singapore and your role specifically in this?
Sure. So at IMDA, we see ourselves as architects of Singapore's digital future. We're quite unique as a government agency because we have three sort of concurrent roles. And the first one is as economic developer, and a lot of that is about understanding how digital brings about economic opportunities for Singaporeans. But we also have a role as regulator, and that's something you already referred to when mentioning my titles. And that's really about, in the digital space, keeping Singaporeans safe and secure, and really engendering public trust in the community at large. And the third is really social leveler, and this is about understanding what digital and technology means for the wider public and how that can be harnessed. So all three come into play when we talk about technology. And in the Data Innovation and Protection Group, I focus very much on data policy as well as AI policy and what that means in terms of economic opportunity and also keeping the public safe and creating that trusted ecosystem. So we bring all three hats together. We try and push the boundaries. And Singapore also plays a role in the ASEAN region, convening some of those conversations. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Not just ASEAN, I assume. I mean, in the wider body, globally, we are also trying to contribute, I assume.
Yes, that's right. I think Singapore has always been seen as a sort of practical and forward-leaning country, especially in the digital space. And we always try to participate actively and contribute to the international conversation as well, especially in nascent and evolving spaces and technologies, especially AI, for example.
Right. So for us, we've been on this series about tech and AI, and I think we used to sort of understand that AI has always been already at play in many of our applications, many of our functions, even in the emails, basically deciding what spam mail is and isn't is already being sort of driven by AI. So in a sense, we've kind of accepted that AI has already crept into our lives in some form. But what really sort of drove the public consciousness in the last few months is really the sudden explosion of generative AI, which has amazing, sort of outputs that are in the hands of the common person rather than, traditionally you would need a skilled artist or someone who's got very, very high level skills using very sophisticated software to achieve certain things. And now, the AI can reproduce a lot of that without much effort. And that has created, both a lot of interesting positive outcomes and yet a lot of concern and alarms. So I think one of the questions that people always ask is, it's a tool, like any other tool. It can be for the good or can be abused for nefarious purposes. Now, in this instance, for generative AI in particular, whose responsibility is it to ensure that this tool isn't abused? Is it simply the users? Is it the companies that make it? Is it the government? Who plays a role in being responsible about the use and development of AI?
No, I think that's a great question. And something that we've been thinking about a lot. I think I would first set the stage to say that we need to create that trusted ecosystem. It is an ecosystem approach that we need, and that is necessary to achieve two things. One is a safe space where the public feels confident about using the technology for all the good that you've mentioned. But the other thing is also to make sure that there is enough room for maximal innovation for companies, organizations, and individuals who want to use that technology. So we're always thinking about that balance. And to do that, you actually need all the players in the ecosystem to play a role. So I'll break it up roughly into 3 buckets. The first one would be the foundation model developers. And that's really one of the key sort of unique aspects of generative AI. There are these very large models, large language models that form that base and foundation. Right. And on top of that, then you have the second bucket or group of people that are involved, which are the application deployers. And those are really people, organizations, big companies, small companies who are not building the base models themselves, but really building applications on top of that. And it's called a foundational model because the model is that foundation, right. But the application is layered on top of it. Okay. And some of the complication comes because it's not so easy always to parse out which parts are the foundation, which parts are the application on top of it. And I'll get to your question in a minute, but the third group is really the end user, the people who are just using the technology at the tail end of this entire deployment life cycle. So when we now come to the idea of who bears that responsibility and what roles do they play, very, very broadly, we think that the model developer needs to adopt robust safety measures in developing the model. Okay. And they need to do this from the lens that building their model has broader system implications. And a lot of what happens in the foundation model is what we call a black box, where you cannot quite see what's happening inside. The application deployers, on the other hand, who are building on top of this, they need to assess the risk based on the specific use and what they're trying to build. And a finance application can be very different from an HR application, can be very different from a fun sort of game that is built for children under a certain age. So they need to understand what context, what target audience, what addressable market they're working toward, and what are the risks and safety mitigations that they have to put in place. They also have to understand, and this is where the sort of foundation model developer and the app deployer have to kind of work together or have that conversation about what the risks they're inheriting from the foundation model. And then third-party testers, another group that I haven't quite mentioned yet, there is a role for some sort of independent assessment and verification of both models and applications, and that can also help engender trust in the ecosystem. Sure. And then lastly, the public, I think, also has a role to play to educate themselves, understand what are the users of AI and how to use the technology appropriately. Because like any other technology, you can have good use and you can have malicious or bad use, right? So the public also needs to educate themselves to be able to discern. I think the last thing I would say in answer to your question is that the sciences of safety and testing, they're quite nascent and they're still evolving. So I think both, almost all the parties have some responsibility or role in trying to figure out where the gaps are still, so that the science can advance.
Okay, that's interesting. So you've sort of identified, I guess, different links in the chain that goes to the end product. And when you say foundational model, I'm assuming that you're referring to like OpenAI, who built the ChatGPT as the foundational model, is an example of it. And then from there, people build applications on it, to use, as you say, to generate specific, maybe industry-specific outcomes from their application. So it's powered by ChatGPT, but it's really trained and maybe sort of refined for the travel industry, and maybe you can, churn up an itinerary quickly using it, something like that. So that's your second category. And then the third group of independent testers, I suppose, it will be a bit like your ratings agencies, like your Moody's and Standard & Poor's, would be like saying, hey, these guys are reliable, these guys are not.
Auditing firms, testing firms. And,
right.
I think there is a traditional what we call TIC, or Testing, Inspection, Certification industry.
Okay.
It's very nascent in the AI space, but there is some value in third-party testing and assurance as a whole.
Right.
To be able to help users, buyers, and sellers understand how this technology is safely built and safely deployed.
Right. Okay. Which actually brings us to a very, I guess it's a very pertinent question that is in the minds of everyone right now. The issue of the abuse of the AI for malicious purposes. That means this is not something that was necessarily a fundamental flaw in the foundational model. This is not something that was, again, a poorly designed application. It is a case of an end user using this in a way that is malicious. And we are talking about, say, deepfakes. So for us, in the local context, the one that made the rounds was a viral video of Lee Hsien Loong. And there are more of them. I see like Elon Musk deepfake videos everywhere trying to sell you stuff. And like really recent for us anyway, at the point of recording this podcast, is Taylor Swift and her deepfake photos that went viral. And I think that the question for the average person on the street is, what can be done about this? Is there a role that the government can play, or is there something that the government is doing to try to address this, or is it one of those things which you can't? You can't. I mean, this is something that's just beyond everybody. You mentioned the different buckets, and I guess everyone has a role to play in it. But the question that would invariably get thrown to the government is, quite apart from everyone in these buckets behaving responsibly, because we know that there will occasionally be bad actors no matter what they are supposed to do. Are there any other things, any other tools, levers, safeguards that the government can put in place to protect the average person from this kind of malicious use cases? Or in the government's interest, you don't want misinformation and disinformation spreading, especially if it's in the guise of a public official saying something that they didn't actually say. So what's the government's response to this kind of problem?
No, I think it's a very good question and an important one. I think the first thing we have to realize is that there are technical solutions that are in place. But before we discuss that, maybe we need to understand really what generative AI does and how it has impact on misinformation. And that's really about speed and scale. It exacerbates misinformation, which is actually a problem that we've had for a long time and we've lived with for a long time, because it has it gives us increased ability to create misinformation at scale with speed, and the dissemination is difficult to track. So a whole of society approach is needed. Governments certainly play an important role. And there has been an overall recognition for the need for technical solutions. There are some nascent ones today, such as digital watermarking and content provenance, but these are still nascent and evolving.
Sure.
But the main idea and outcome is to basically label, provide additional information for trusted content. But these solutions, they're not a silver bullet.
Of course.
And the policies need to be carefully designed to ensure also that these technologies are used in the right context. And that's an area that we're currently exploring. But the technical solutions that I've just mentioned also have to be looked at in the context of a wider multi-pronged approach.
Of course.
Regulation is already in place and has been used for a while. And I think another important aspect we need to remember is public education. I mentioned that just now. And the public also needs to start building an awareness of what of how to discern and what to believe and not to believe, which I understand is easier said,
of course,
than done. But we need to start building those muscles.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that applies across the board for all sorts of things, like when people give you a scam call, the friend scam from another country, and the technical solutions you mentioned are interesting. I guess if I could sort of paraphrase it, is what we are recognizing in the AI content generation space is that you can't stamp out the creation of these things. It's just too easy nowadays that we are basically leaning towards the approach we take for, let's say, product safety labeling or food safety labeling.
Exactly.
Yeah, where I can't go around and tell everybody that don't use that piece of equipment because it may blow up in your face. I have no way of stopping someone from shipping that and putting it on the store shelf. But if you're not going to look for the right labels on it that says that if you plug it in, it's not going to blow up, then it really is something that you have to take responsibility for, because there's beyond a certain point we can't, catch every fake or improperly designed object out there. So I guess what you're saying is that the AI equivalent of that would be that we put watermarks in there to show the authenticity of an image or a video, or like say crypto provenance, which is basically you trace it all the way back to the origin, who created this, and if you can't prove that it was authentically created or from an authentic source, then buyer beware. You need to just decide what you want to do with it.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And these are different techniques really to give consumers additional information about content. And the consumer will then have to look at that information exactly like a food label or a drug label to then make an informed decision about what they're looking at, just as they make informed decisions, hopefully, about what they eat and what they ingest. There are some other sort of initiatives that are happening that were recently announced. For example, there'll be a Center for Advanced Technologies in Online Safety under the Online Trust and Safety Research Program that will be set up to build up Singapore's expertise in detecting deepfakes and online misinformation. So there are different efforts that are happening, but I think the sort of fundamental tenets are what we talked about.
Right, okay. Yeah, I guess, this is the challenge of our age, which is that trust is actually really being eroded in many arenas. So, of course, one of the companies that is under fire now a lot regarding this whole issue is Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, now X, where a lot of in fact, the whole Taylor Swift issue blew up on X. So we get this question of how do you deal with this problem if the company itself, quite apart from whether the company wants to do it or not, it doesn't even have the ability to do it. So for like X, there's some feature that was introduced called community notes, which is it gives people, the ability to contribute to addressing posts by someone else that is fake, to give context to it, like, this photo is actually not of this incident that you said. It actually took place somewhere else, and this is really what happened, and so on. So I guess that's part of trying to, as you say, create that ecosystem where everyone plays a part in helping to combat these, fake things and misinformation and so on.
No, you're right, because there's the creation, but there's also the amplification and distribution.
That's right.
And that happens using different technology platforms. And then the ingestion of the information is by the end user using these platforms. So there is an entire group or range of stakeholders involved, and like you say, everyone has a different responsibility to contribute towards the broader trust and safety of the ecosystem.
Right. Okay. Well, that's interesting. That brings us to what we, as a Singapore government, announced at Davos, which is the draft Model Governance Framework for AI, or the term is Model AI Governance Framework for Generative AI. What is this for the layperson?
No, that's a great question. And if I were to put it simply, it's a framework that seeks to set out the key factors and dimensions that are required for that safe and trusted environment. It's meant to be comprehensive and systematic because, as you know and as you've mentioned, there are a lot of conversations that are happening today on Gen AI across different countries and many, many conversations. So what we tried to do with this piece is to really pull together some of these issues and dimensions into one systematic framework. And it has 9 dimensions. It needs to be looked at in totality. But we think that it kind of takes a step towards understanding what that safe ecosystem and environment will look like. And maybe I explain a little bit that actually Singapore has been doing work in sort of trustworthy AI for a while. We've always kind of taken a practical, risk-based approach. And again, it goes back to that trade-off I was talking about, or rather balancing trusted ecosystem, making sure there's space for innovation. And that's the same sort of foundation with this piece. And we wanted to really further that international consensus and conversation, pull together the different generative AI governance concerns. And in a way, we treated it independent of specific jurisdictional legislation or concerns. It was really looking at the core design of what the issues are and then what potential solutions could look like for all different countries with a different range of national concerns.
Sure.
And it's also meant to be practical to offer key stakeholders, including policymakers, regulators, industry, research community, some ideas about how to think about these issues. But actually, it's still it's a proposed draft, and we're actually seeking international views. So we also expect to refine it along the way.
So what document would this finally result in after it? It would just be a framework that I suppose countries can adopt if they choose to, and companies can say, yeah, we agree with these elements, at least the parts that are relevant for us as a corporate entity, and we want to sort of abide by them. Is it what this document is meant to do eventually when it's sort of in a more finalized state?
I think it's yes, but broader and bigger than that, because it's also meant for policymakers, regulators, governments, industry associations, people to start thinking about how these issues fit together.
Right. Okay.
And then it can be translated into a specific industry context or a specific, for example, consumer context.
Sure.
But what we didn't see out there hitherto was that pulling together of the different conversations. And it's understandable because, this is a very new technology, as you've said. A lot of these conversations were happening fast and furious and just starting to coalesce. So we wanted to help with that coalescing and that consensus. So still early days. I think the idea is that we will gather views, make sure it's hitting the mark with the international community, and then confirm that. And I think that also gives us, as Singapore, a sense of how we can make better domestic policy in this space. So that's really how it's meant to be used.
Right. Interesting. So I guess, again, as you mentioned, the whole point of all of these things that we're doing is to try to strike that balance between, on one hand, protecting against something that kind of goes off the rails, and everyone kind of always has that doomsday scenario about things that have been done in popular culture. I don't think that sentience is really our worry right now. I think there's many other ways we can destroy ourselves using AI long before the AI does it for us. But then on the other hand, you want to balance between creating that space for innovation, for the proper use of AI that can really improve our lives. I mean, I just read an article recently where an AI-driven research exercise basically came up with some new materials for batteries that could improve on even the kind of batteries you use today rather than just lithium and stuff like that. So there are many use cases that are amazing in terms of new drugs and whatever. So how do we balance that? But so now switching to the positive benefits of AI. I mean, how do you see AI sort of impacting Singapore in the near future? In what areas do you think we will see the most striking improvements, dramatic changes to the way we do things?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we do believe in the sort of transformative potential of this technology. And we strongly believe that the technology should be harnessed for the public good. It will create new opportunities, better jobs, safer, more meaningful connections for people. And we believe that all members of society should have access to the technology done in a trusted manner. And we can support this in a variety of ways. For example, through digital literacy initiatives. We can help to encourage and teach responsible and safe use. We can provide additional support to SMEs to drive innovation and adoption. And as you said, actually today AI already powers many services. I give you some examples like adaptive learning systems in schools, chronic health management in hospitals, and I think we'll continue as a society, as a government, to identify new use cases and to provide AI solutions to address the citizens' issues and pain points. I think there's also the part about helping workers to, get the necessary skill sets for an AI-enabled future, and that's an important part of it. Working with sectorial leads as well for targeted interventions, and really helping workers to perform in these new and augmented roles to derive value overall for all of us.
Right. No, it's interesting you say augmented because I heard this from more than one person actually who said that we should not be afraid that AI will put us out of our jobs. We should be afraid that people who use AI properly will put us out of our jobs, which means that really the future will very much belong to people who understand how to use AI effectively. And it's not just the AI itself sort of taking over our jobs, but people still doing the job, but they're doing far better than you because they're using AI correctly. Is that something that's a mindset we want to?
I think so, and but it's important to also provide the structures and support to help our working population to learn the technology, to adopt it and adapt it to be able to perform more effectively and perform better.
Right. Interesting. We are going to be running out of time, so I just want to sort of ask you a question that's a bit more personal. And we always end our podcast with a slightly more personal question. So in this case, if you had one task in your life right now that you're doing manually, and it doesn't have to be just something related to work. It can be something mundane in your home or whatever. But if there's one task that you could have an AI take over immediately and automate it for you, what would that be?
Supervising my children doing homework. And it will save me a lot of time and pain.
So what form would you want this AI to be? Would it be like a robot nanny? Would it be like a disembodied voice like Siri or something?
I think robot nanny might make a lot of sense, and I can still dial in and watch if I need to.
I think actually if there was such a product, it would be in hot demand. Yeah,
Thanks so much.
I could do with one of those as well. Yeah, but thank you so much for your time. I think this is something which we really appreciate to have the government's viewpoint on it. And we understand completely that this is a very quickly evolving space, and some of the things we said today might even change dramatically soon. But it's nice to get a snapshot of where we are right now. So thank you so much, Denise. We appreciate this, and we hope that we can also tap on you in future for other podcasts.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.